Hello, everybody. This is Harper, and we are playing DNF Duel. It is the second of their betas that they've done. This game is out in July, June. Comes out in the summer, a little bit before EVO, but it is not at EVO. That's an important distinction. This is a game based off of the, at least in the East, balls-bustingly popular franchise of Dungeon Fighter Online. My brain just had a total meltdown right when I was supposed to say something that's important, and it's made me look like a fool. So you'll notice that characters are called things like Inquisitor or Striker or Dragon Knight, and that's just, I think it's easier to have them called that than have some sort of canonical name that people around the world don't know. It also tells you a little bit about their character. So I'm playing Striker because I am a Giovanna player and a Naoto player, and to extent a Lancelot player, which means I like characters that rush down. Lancelot's not quite comparable to this. I like characters that rush down. I like characters that can exert a lot of corner pressure. I like characters that have some combo potential, even though they don't have to necessarily have the biggest combos. Combos in Granblue, for instance, are kind of relatively limited, whereas, Giovanna can do some of the most gnarly shit I've ever seen, especially with air combos. Let's talk about this game, though, and go from there. It is both very fun and frustrating. It is both a game where matches can be incredibly dynamic and, to an extent, moment-to-moment thought-provoking, and then sometimes it can just be the most ignorant thing in the world. You might hear people call this Granblue Part 2 or something, and that's not fair to Granblue, because Granblue is a better game and has more moment-to-moment strategic depth than this game for a variety of reasons. It is also something you might hear people call a party game, or some people might even go as far to call it a kusoge, a shit game. Those have a little bit more truth to them, but I think it's hard to call something that so early when a game is underdeveloped. But at the same time, there's definitely characters in this game that just have gnarly tools. This is a game where character kits seem to exist without any thought for how they interact with each other and whether or not there's any parity between some of those kits. I don't have as many matches that exemplify that or show that off here, but there are some characters who have normals that extend basically half screen. You have a character who, once they buff themselves, can do like a 4 or 5 hit combo for like 60% of your life with just their like low down B attack. This is a game full of some bullshit, and yet I find it very fun. So let's talk about some of the good things, and we'll go to talk about some of the bad things. Good things, a variety of different characters to play from. That I'm sure there's something here that will appeal to you, which is funny to say after I've just said character kits are kind of fucked up, and I maintain that both of these things can be true. You will find a character design or a character archetype that you find appealing, whether that's something like the rushdown stuff here or the pressure stuff that I enjoy here with Striker, whether that's having a fast sort of throw option stuff with the grappler character, whether that's you're really into zoning and you play the ranger character and he has guns. There's something here, I feel like, that vaguely appeals to most playstyles, which is very good. Additionally, it's pretty easy to pick up for one of the reasons that people tend to compare this to Granblue, which is that it has easy special attack inputs, which means with the press of one single button plus directionals, you can toss out such ridiculous special attacks such as that. We'll get to that. It also means that when you first are playing and you just want to learn how to link certain attacks together, then that can be really useful. One thing that I did with Granblue, and I'm kind of doing here, is that I will use the easy inputs to understand what can link into what, and then eventually, because they do exist, you can use motion inputs. Those motions aren't very complicated. For the most part, they tend to be quarter circle back or quarter circle forward, and then also a DP motion. The benefit for doing that is you recover some of your, I guess it's mana, some of your resource back a little faster. In Granblue, this meant that the cooldowns on abilities were shorter. So I think in that way you can compare it to Granblue, as I think Granblue and this are games that are easy to pick up. The difference with Granblue is I would say Granblue is not ridiculous to master, but there are certain thresholds that make it a more interesting fighting game wherein the options that you choose mean more, by which I mean they have greater risk and potentially greater reward, and also have a variety of strategic value. Whereas this game, like it or not, and then again, this is a beta, so it's hard to make a qualitative judgment. It feels sometimes like this game has a limited amount of approaches, and it has a certain degree of disparities between characters that mean that your risk or reward can vary wildly. And I mean, obviously risk reward in any game varies from matchup to matchup, but here it can feel like they vary incredibly, to different degrees than anything I've experienced in any other fighting game. Right? Obviously, in any game, you need to take into consideration what your opponent can do. But here, it's like some characters just, and I don't use this word lightly, they feel like they have a great deal of privilege. There's a character, for instance, called Vanguard, who I've kind of alluded to, or maybe I did, my brain is mush right now, who has essentially half-screen normals, one of which can vacuum, like I think it's a normal, that can vacuum an enemy to him. And then he has some pretty easy special attack loops that can do 40%. Whereas, if I'm playing Striker, my strength comes from exerting pressure, but also that pressure is corner pressure, and it needs to come in a series of a couple of attacks. I'm sure there are optimal combos that will lead to greater return once I'm able to learn them, but this game right now in beta doesn't have a training mode. So what are you going to do? This means that certain characters seem to have very innate advantages to each other. And I can mostly speak of this from the viewpoint of somebody who's playing Striker, a character who has stubby normals, which means that in a game full of characters with large normals that can cover, that right there, that jumping slash that the Berserker did, covers basically from top of screen to bottom, means that no matter what approach I'm taking, whether I'm running, trying to, slide kick in and low profile, or if I'm jumping, it means that just denies me an entire avenue of approach, which can be fine, right? It's totally fine to have moves like that, but this is a game that doesn't have air blocking, so it's very easy to call out. I can jump over that special attack there, but it's a very specific spacing thing. If I'm not there at the right time, then I kind of get screwed over. This is a big special attack. ArcSys games or ArcSys produced games do look gorgeous, which is very nice. It's one of the reasons I was so fascinated by this game. But you can see I didn't get there close enough to have my jump that can cross in. And because of that, I kind of paid the price. Which is funny because this is kind of a criticism of the game. I guess it is a criticism of the game. Is that neutral doesn't really exist in this game. There's not a lot of footsies. There's not a lot of back and forth movement. Partially because of those aforementioned huge buttons that I'm talking about. Specifically because I'm fairly certain many of those buttons are disjointed, which means that you can't even really clash with them. And so your choices are to be very specific in the ways that you punish. If you're a character like mine, you have to run in and hope they're not pushing a button again. It depends on how much recovery they have, how plus or minus they might be on hit or just on swing, which is something that's hard to gauge again without, the ability to hop into training or to have the nerds at Dustloop really examine frame data. But this also means, neutral doesn't exist because the game movement is very slow. And they buffed it, to my understanding, which is hard to imagine what it must have felt like in Beta 1 because it really feels slow. Running has a long startup time. When you're doing your walking back and forth, it's pretty slow. You have some hops and dashes, but they're not brilliant. And then, neutral tends to amount to, can you, if you're somebody like me, can you get over a button? And if you're somebody who has big buttons, right, I'm pretty sure that's just the dude's DP compared to mine. You can see how one is really fat and one is very thin. And they are as fat or as thin as they look. Striker's DP is particularly narrow, whereas some people have very large ones. This is not me sitting here and downplaying my character. I like my character. Look at that. That's gnarly. That's super cool. What I just did there, what she can do with all those jabs and stuff. But there are definitely characters who feel advantaged either by the size of their normals or the ways that they have special attacks which cover a massive swath of the screen. There's a character called Hitman in here, and he has some swinging sword normals that, as far as I can tell, you cannot go under, you can't low profile them, and you can't jump over, so it's just a wall that is a hitbox, and you have to wait for that to end. And if they have a lot of mana or whatever, they can presumably spam it, which gives them control over a massive chunk of the screen, and also means that they prevent approaches for about 3 seconds or so, however long that attack is, which is something that I can't do on my character, which is something the grappler can't do. And each character has advantages and disadvantages. Like, my corner pressure is far better than some other characters, but in a game where so much of what matters is how much space your normals can take up, that doesn't always feel great. Obviously, once I'm in here, it feels pretty gnarly, right? Maybe not as gnarly as playing as Giovanna, but if I land my confirms, I can carry to the corner kind of nice as long as I'm not dropping. But the risk of approach can be really difficult if you're fighting, Vanguard, whose normals are basically half screen. If you're fighting Hitman, who can just toss out walls of hitboxes. If you're playing Crusader, who just has one of the most privileged air projectiles I've ever seen. It's huge and it moves really fast, and his buttons are huge, and they can combo into each other. If he's buffed with, like, his holy magic or whatever, he can knock you down if you're against the wall, which is, say, if you're against the corner, or a wall, which he can create underneath you instantly, which also tosses you into the air. If he's buffed, he can toss down, I think it's his down B, is down, for all intents and purposes, let's say down heavy. And it just combos into itself like 4 times. He'll take like 50% or more, maybe, depending on what you're doing. That flame wheel is like a huge button, right? Like, if they toss that out, I can't approach. It hits around 25 to 27 times. If it sounds like I'm complaining about bad matchups or whatever, that's not the point of what I'm trying to convey here. What I am trying to convey is that certain characters just have toolkits, or even normals, that exist almost in this vacuum where on paper they're like, this sounds gnarly, and then they weren't given a lot of consideration for how they would interact with each other. So matchups feel sometimes great and sometimes very poisonous. There I jumped there, which it catches me because there's no air blocking in this game. So, right there they kind of roll over me, and I wanted to show off some matches where I lose, obviously. And you can see the reason why I lose is because my various ways to approach are kind of messed up. Here I switched to a character called Ghostblade. They're new, and you'll see, compared to the character I was playing, which is the character I prefer, just what they have in their toolkit, which is pretty powerful. Very big normals, not the biggest. An attack that goes full screen, which is that ghost teleporting. He has his own teleport. They catch me in the air there, so good for them. Oh, no, we get a connection issue because this is a beta. And you'll see where it's like, he has a lot of things. He has space control. He has some potentially very fast movement, right? And then, look, I do a teleport that crosses them up, basically, and then I can go into my super move while they're in block stun, or hit stun, I should say. And there's nothing they can do about it, right? Whereas if I'm on Striker, just to make the point of comparison, because these are the 2 points of comparison that I can really make, her special attack doesn't extend that far. There's also a character called Ranger, who is a zoning character. Not the hardest to get in on, but he has some options and some cool escape options to create distance. He probably doesn't do as much damage as he should, but figuring that out is probably a tough balancing act. But here it's like, Striker's special attack confirm is very narrow. You have to be very close to the enemy. Whereas here on Ghostblade, like, I'm not even somebody who really understands this character well yet, but I am able to do that teleport dash and cross them up and hit them, which is very powerful, right? This character, in some ways, has some very clear and powerful advantages in ways that, if I'm playing on Grappler, I don't, even though my grab attacks on that character are very powerful. It's the ability to teleport like that and go into super. Look at that. That's gnarly. And yeah, the game gives me the tools, so obviously I'm going to use it. But I'm sure for the person I was playing against, that probably felt not great to fight. So I go back and forth on this game, where I think character designs are mostly cool, where I think the kits are interesting in isolation, and my concern becomes, how do these characters interact with each other? What are these matchups like? And I go back and forth from being like, this game's very fun, and then also going like, man, this game's kinda jank and not well considered yet, which is a hard thing to deal with. It's a hard thing to have a game that you think is fun and easy to pick up, even for people who are kind of new to these games. And then, I can say, hey, if you want to learn some fighting game stuff, you can play this game. But it has to come right now with the asterisk of, well, what's your bullshit threshold like, right? For instance, fighting Striker versus Grappler just feels like a normal fighting game. But if I'm in there on Ghostblade versus, I don't know, Hitman or whatever, it feels very different. So these characters, the way they fight is disparate, and that's good because it means that you can have something that appeals to you on a fundamental level throughout the roster. But the issue becomes the ways in which these characters in the roster interact, which can feel a little ill-considered, or perhaps not even considered at all. So this is a fun matchup, although Grappler, Striker isn't the most exciting design, but she has a little bit going for her. Grappler just looks like, man, it's like, yo, you should go back to King of Fighters or something. But even then, King of Fighters probably has more sauce than this game, right? Another thing you might hear people say is that this game has no mix. I think that's kind of true, right? The fundamental limits of your mix tend to be a high-low game. There's some crossing up, there's some Okazeme stuff you can do, some meaty hits you can do, but, right now, it feels like there's not as much mix-up or approaches that you can take. Now, that obviously changes as the game moves forward and develops, so it's hard to say, oh, this game definitely has no mix, but right now it feels not linear, because I think linearity implies a very strict limit on the potential approaches you have, but it does feel like, certain kits have faster options, and certain kits have, options that are a little bit more quote-unquote honest, right? In the same way that you would call, I guess, a character like Kai in Strive quote-unquote honest, compared to just the churning mix machine of something like Zato. I mean, the difference there is that Kai is easy to use and Zato is difficult to use. But here, none of the characters have a distinct situation where one is inherently more difficult to use over the other. They all play the same, by which I mean, in terms of their execution and their buttons, they're largely the same. This is against Dragon Knight, a character I had never played before. And you can see, this is an example of character kits that feel, partially because I don't know how to fight this character yet, but also can feel kind of weird, where it's like, definitely bigger buttons than I have and more ranged options. I just have no ranged options, right? I'm used to playing characters like that. Naoto doesn't have a fireball or whatever. Giovanna certainly doesn't. Gio makes up for that in the, both Gio and Naoto, quite frankly, make up for that with the speed of their special attacks and the distance that they can cover. So I wouldn't look at this matchup with as much incredulity, or this fight, as I maybe do if it felt like maybe my character had movement speed that made this more interesting. As it stands, it's like, it can be kind of weird to do stuff. I thought that maybe that would catch them in the air. So I do okay exerting pressure at the start, but it's like, once I'm here, approaching them becomes very tricky. And I'm finding that to be kind of consistent. And you can say, well, Harper, that means that you're bad, which maybe is true in the sense that I don't know the characters yet, and I've always been something of an intermediate player. But I think it also implies to me that there definitely are just characters who have a lot going on compared to others. This is Ghostblade again, against somebody who's not playing as well as that other character, or the other player, I should say, where it's just like, characters have a lot of tools, I can go back and forth. Like Ghostblade can teleport back and forth, cross, cross, cross. Now your solution to that is the fact that there is a block button in this game that will auto-correct to that. Block buttons are a tricky thing in games. Granblue has a block button, but you use it situationally because usually holding back or down back or whatever can work to your advantage because it means replying faster, by which I mean it's much easier. Like if somebody's attacking me and I want to toss out a single Rekka throw into something else, it's easier for me to do that on Lancelot when I'm not just holding the block button. It's easier to do that coming out of just a normal block. Because block buttons tend to, in certain ways, they definitely lock you in place, so you can't dash or do any other stuff. So they limit your mobility, and they kind of can limit how reactive you can be, which is partially true in this game. But because characters like Ghostblade have so much back and forth speed, then it becomes interesting to see the ways in which that a block button kind of can keep you trapped in place. I've seen some people develop this character down very scary roads, right? Like, I think this character has a very effective B&B. I've seen Diaphone develop that. I think Deb was playing this character for a bit. Obviously, they're pro players, right? But I just get like completely owned here for a minute, trying to figure out the ways to approach. I like this guy's name, When's MVC4, which is very funny. It doesn't mean that this is an unwinnable matchup between these two characters, but it does mean observing in action some of those difficulties of, well, how do you approach on somebody whose buttons are fast and they reach far? You know, that I think that's one of the interesting things about Ghostblade is that his buttons are pretty fast. Now, obviously, the answer is just kind of vary the approaches that you take and hope that you can bust through, but it feels to an extent, and maybe I'm wrong here, that this game feels kind of RPS heavy, where it's like just like you have to make the gamble and you have to toss out the option and hope that you're tossing out the right option. Do get the super confirm there, which is nice. The range on it for my character is very small, though, kind of like I've talked about before. So this game feels, because there's not really a lot of neutral, when you're making approaches, you have to make what feels like some pretty important commitments. And within the nature of those commitments, it can feel either, you know, especially if you're going against characters that have, you know, this is Berserker. He's not as bad, but this player is very aggressive, right? Where trying to find the approach vectors are not brilliant. Because you just have to take those gambles. Are you doing the ground approach or going low? Obviously, you have these options, but I did not mean to hit DP there. But you can see, even if you're making those gambles and you're throwing out those options and taking those risks, some characters just like, I can't jump in there, I can't run in there, I can't jump in there. I have to be at a very specific spacing distance to overcome that special, at least at the moment. There is another solution to it that I need to use, which is that Striker has a special attack that kind of has a dash that can break through certain things. I don't know if it can break through normals. It can definitely break through certain special attacks. But as you can see, this is just a character with, and it's a trend that you're seeing. It's like, I think the thing you want in this game is a character where the buttons are pretty powerful. But as you can see, you're going to watch this same matchup, and I've played a little bit more of the matchup, but also I'm not letting them play their game as much. My game is just in the corner pretty constantly. That doesn't seem to be like their actual reversal, but for all intents and purposes, that's a DP. You know, it's kind of interesting. But here it's like I need to commit. One thing that'll make playing this character a bit better is knowing how to turn those confirms into something bigger. But this demo, this beta, I should say, doesn't have a training mode, which means that it's hard to determine frame data, to determine what is or is not particularly advantageous. I think a lot of things in this game are relatively not minus. I feel like this is a game that's built a lot around plus frames. Because you can reset some block strings and some things pretty easy. To offset that, there is a guard cancel, kind of like a dead angle type thing. So that's not a huge problem, but it is different. And now, like, there's that shoulder tackle, so it does allow me approach, but it is something that you have to do on reaction or read, I would say. When I see that big attack, there's enough, that big blood attack, there's enough time to do something on reaction. In other cases, like, maybe if I was trying to do that to beat a normal, which I don't even know if it can do, then doing that on read could be kind of difficult. It's kind of hard to say. But you can see the difference between, somebody who's maybe exhibiting their kit to its full potential. I'm obviously not using my kit to its fullest potential, but you can see that difference between that last player we played and then this character. And obviously I get a good corner combo there, which is very nice. That's the sort of stuff that you want from Striker, right? Which seems self-explanatory, but it's worth mentioning. And then the only catch just becomes how advantaged or disadvantaged certain characters are by their kit and by their buttons. In some cases, I think, a character like Crusader just is gnarly. I don't know how that character is allowed to exist in the game in his current state. With a load that combos into each other so much, he has some sort of fireball type thing that floats in the air and then fires down from above. He jumps in the air. He has an air projectile that's very fast. I think the approach to this game has been to buff everyone, but I think that ignores the fact that in the first beta, there were characters that were just clearly, their kits showed a great deal of strengths that were hard to overcome. And I don't think the answer was buff everybody, because that just takes the playing field and keeps it relatively even, right? If somebody was already doing well before, they're doing just as well, right? If I am standing on the first rung of a ladder and you're on the 5th rung, and the answer is, well, everybody go up one rung of the ladder, that just means I'm on the 2nd rung and you're on the 6th rung. It doesn't always work out the best as a balancing situation, even though I generally tend to think that buffs are better than nerfs. But also sometimes you just gotta nerf shit. As you can see at my health too, there's a gray portion there that's refilling. They should punish me there. When you do certain attacks, they do something resembling chip damage, which is they cause this gray health to show up, and then when you use a special attack, you land, I think this is how it works, something called a brutal hit, which takes all that gray health and immediately deletes it. So it's a game built around sometimes using your normals to chip certain things down, and then also using your specials to take advantage of whatever chip that you've done. I don't dislike this matchup as much because the Inquisitor doesn't have the hugest buttons, so I still feel I can get in. They have that special attack, which is, I don't know how that exists. It's pretty fucked up. The size of that is just big. It hits for 27 hits or something too. So those are the moments where people are like, how is this game real? And I'm inclined to agree. Where I go like, man, the way that this game can sometimes feel is pretty great, and then somebody tosses out like the world's largest special attack or something, and you're not sure what to do. We are back on fighting a Ghostblade. This is a matchup I don't think is too bad. Even with their normals and their teleports, this one feels approachable. The two unapproachable matchups for me right now feel like, at least on Striker, feel like Vanguard and Hitman. There's probably ways to crack them, right? A matchup is just a puzzle, right? No matchup is like a 10-0. You just have to find the options that work for each character. So losing doesn't bother me as much right now because they are learning opportunities, but it is clear that there are certain characters that have clear advantages, which I guess is a point that I'm hammering home. It just feels like there are some characters who fundamentally have better kits. And I think the game needs to reassess maybe movement speed and a couple of other things to understand ways to bring everything in line. It's still a fun game, and we're about to end, so I recommend giving it a try, but just know that you might have to put up with some bullshit. It still is very fun, though, so we'll see how it is. I'll see you around.